Good afternoon, everyone. So I hope you've taken a lot out of today. I'm going to do my very best to keep your energy going because I'm aware this is potentially the graveyard slot. So I will try to keep you as engaged and energized as I can for the next 30 minutes. So a bit of an intro. I have spent 25 years, given my age away there, in external agencies, and I know we don't really like that terminology, and I completely see why, but of varying different shapes and sizes, all in London. So I spent the 90s in what was then known as below the line agencies doing CRM, sales promotion. I spent a couple of years client side at BA, and then I moved into WPP, where I spent 9 great years with Grey London, focusing a lot on integration and how to bring multiple WPP agencies together. I then moved on to Havas, where I spent 3 years. And then today you find me a year into my Specsavers career. I thought I'm going to share with you today kind of the insights I've gleaned from moving from the external world into in-house. What a year it's been. I mean, it's been a dreadful year for all of us in so many ways, but also a year where I think we've all been on a learning curve, especially in Specsavers. We're a high street retailer, so it's been a really challenging year. But before I talk about what I've learned and where we are as an agency and share some of those insights, a little bit of context about Specsavers. So these are all the things that I didn't know until I started talking about this role. And may be really helpful when to set a context for some of the insights that I share with you. The business is based on a partnership model. So each of our Specsavers stores is co-owned by a retailer or an optics partner, along with Specsavers. So the whole organization is based on partnership and the support we give those partners. So we don't have a head office at Specsavers, we have a support office. So that partnership and that giving support is really baked into our DNA. And I think that's been a really important foundation of perhaps why in-housing has really worked for the business. So we were in-housing before in-housing was a thing. So 36 years ago, when Mary and Doug, who you can see on this slide here, both opticians, began to build this idea of Specsavers on their ping pong table that you can see there. They probably had no idea, did they, how ubiquitous and famous this brand would become. So we were probably, and context, caveat, I've not qualified this one, but we're probably one of the first in-house agencies. Specsavers has built its brand having never used an external creative agency. And I only discovered this when I began talking about this role with Specsavers, and my reaction was, really? So we've been an important part of Specsavers since the very early days. So in a very small marketing department sat a very small studio, which had a handful of people making leaflets and posters for this new business. And as the business grew, they needed some ads. And that handful of people grew to a creative department. And to people based in the UK and Nordics and Australia and New Zealand, this probably needs no introduction. But for those of you that aren't, this is a campaign. It's a famous scene from one of the TVCs called Should Have Gone to Specsavers. For those that aren't familiar with it, it's a campaign that plays on the gag of the consequences of not going to Specsavers for an eye test or to get your glasses. I know Graham Daldry, who was the godfather and the creator of this amazing campaign, has spoken at this event before about its many successes and incarnations. Suffice to say, the team created work that has had one hell of a cultural impact. Launching in 2002, this is really the creative gift that keeps on giving. And it's moved really from being our campaign to everyone else's. So it's not unusual for the public in the UK to get hold of a classic should have moment and put an execution out there before we do, such as what happened when Dominic Cummings decided to take his drive to Barnard Castle just to test his eyes out. I had people on LinkedIn congratulating me for this work, but actually this was done by the public. And we love that. We love the fact that they love our work so much, it's become part of the vernacular. I mean, what greater ambition is there to be achieved? So from the humble team that designed the leaflets and the posters to the creative department that gave us should have, we've been in constant growth. Another contextual piece, which will probably also set up the context for why my Wi-Fi might be a bit dodgy and you might be able to hear storms going on around me. We're based on Guernsey, which wasn't somewhere I'd been until I started talking to Specsavers. And now I find myself living on this beautiful island, surrounded by beaches and cows and stormy weather today. But it's also a really creatively fertile environment, which I'm sure has been a massive part in helping to fuel our growth. So like all great partnerships, we've grown together as Specsavers has. There's now 35,000 employees. There's 100 of us in the agency. Creative operations are center stage of that agency. We really need the infrastructure to deliver the breadth of what we offer. So as an agency, we're influencing the customer experience of the brand end to end. We've got concept teams, ideation, design, production, technology, analytics, strategy, implementation, motion. We are a proper end-to-end agency, and we now refer to ourselves as the agency as opposed to the creative department. And as I say, creative operations are really center stage because we need that infrastructure to deliver the breadth. Headed up by Julia Aronson, we've got a team of 24 people who are involved in various creative production, integrated production, who are the backbone of the agency. As Nils talked about earlier on today, they're the crew that turn the ideas into reality, and we really couldn't exist without them. So we're growing in Guernsey, but we've got exports. We've got a few people who exist and are based in the UK, and a couple of people in Netherlands as well. So that's the context. As I say, they're all the things that I didn't know about Specsavers until I started to have conversations with them. So now let's go a little bit under the bonnet. I suppose my going in position when I moved from external to in-house was that I wanted to take the best of what agencies do and offer and leave the rest. I wanted to make sure that I brought the bits that I felt were relevant with me and unshackled myself really from some of the arguably less relevant pieces. So I'll start with where I see the consistencies lying, those aspects of Adland that I think are really important to still protect when you are an in-house agency. So the first one, and this is a bit of an odd one, but I decided odd was quite good for this conversation. It's a really interesting dynamic. There is still a relentless desire to be the agency of record. I think there's I suppose a latent fear as an in-house agency that you're the default and you've never been anyone's active choice. You know, there's not been a pitch, you've not elbowed someone out of the way, there hasn't been a big debate about appointing you. And I suppose I've got an external agency hat on that was there for 25 years, so it's quite a hard one to shift. And I don't think being kind of default is a great place to be. We want to be the choice. And I suppose having that desire to be the choice isn't a bad thing. Specsavers has never used an external creative agency, as I said in the intro, but that's not a reason for complacency. I think our goal is to be celebrated, not tolerated or just accepted. And therefore to compete, albeit notionally, with external agency world, I think we've got to take the best of what those agencies do. So what's really critical, I think, is, and we almost over-index on this, is setting the guardrails on how we actually work. So there's only a canteen that separates us from the marketing department. So with that in mind, and I'm sure there's a huge amount of empathy for all of you that are in in-house roles, that could turn into a bit of a swirl quite easily. So the creative ops team have been a vital part of setting and critically keeping the guardrails where they need to be. So apologies for the rather dull slide here, but I think it was intentionally so to make the point that actually some of these things are utterly critical, regardless of what sort of shape or position of the agency. So we've implemented some classic client and creative management tools. I think we're hot on processes, not for the sake of it, but probably for the sake of our sanities. We give our team and the marketing team tools to help us navigate those processes. We've overhauled the ways of working and will continue to do so. So I think a really important thing about us as an in-house agency, we've been evolving. I've talked you through that evolution. We will continue to evolve because our business is in growth. So the demands of what the business needs from us continue to change. So we need to be responsive to that. So therefore, the ways of working need to always be changing to respond to that. We're working super hard to be clear on accountabilities because this can get a little bit of a crowded area as well. Again, I'm sure there's empathy abounding with that one. And as with any client team, clarity and consistency of our comms are absolutely crucial, with a bucket full of governance thrown in for good measure. So I think running an in-house agency without any of this structure would just be far too stressful. Certainly of an agency of our size, maybe that's just the ex-suit in me talking, but it's a really, really important part of how we function, and the creative ops team are fundamental in making all of this happen. The next one, in terms of consistencies and what I suppose we share in the behaviours, is around treasuring our partner agencies. And for me, this is a really important one. I mentioned in the intro that I spent a lot of my time at WPP noodling how to get the best out of different agencies coming together for the good of the brand and the business. And I think that's serving us well at Specsavers, because we can't do what we do alone. We work within a hybrid model. So we don't do this on our own. We've got valued partners working across social, analytics, PR, digital and media. And again, it goes back to what Neil said this morning about we can have the best creative ideas in the world. We can have brilliant creative production and execution, but if we don't have the right media plan so that they turn up in the right spaces, then really we haven't done our jobs. So these guys complement the skills we've got in-house, and we play a role of lead agency, driving clarity and collaboration between us all. But it's a bit of a different responsibility from the lead agency role that we would have played in an external agency, because of course we're representing the brand and the business at the same time. So that's a shift in dynamic. But we've lent really heavily into making those agencies understand that we're not another client, we're not another hurdle to get through, we're another agency that wants to work with them and partner them. Again, that partner word really critical. Work really close with them to make the work better collectively. Now, all agencies talk about this, and we're no different. Nurturing our creative culture. In fact, I think it's a bigger challenge within a client-side organisation, but we're super lucky at Specsavers, because the lovely thing is they want and they expect us to have our creative quirkiness. So we've got our own space, which looks and feels different. We're no longer over the other side of the car park, which is a little bit contentious. Not entirely popular move back into the main building, but we've still got a really distinct look and feel to our space. And we're on a journey to make it feel even more us. But of course, the reason culture is so important is the impact it has on our work. And I think you get a sense of what our culture is as an agency through our work. So, you know, it's a really down-to-earth culture. It's understated. We don't take ourselves too seriously, even though what we do is serious. So they are all the things that feel really consistent to me with my life before Specsavers and before in-house. And there's some days I walk into the car park here on the island of Guernsey, and I almost get a shock that I'm not about to jump on a bus in London, because the world feels so similar. You know, the conversations are so much a part of what I'm used to in external agency world, which I guess, given the ask is just the same, that's not surprising. But reconciling this with this 12-minute commute I have, an island life, it's quite a task. But not everything is the same. There's definitely elements of my old world that are left behind. A real biggie for me is this shared agenda. It's the biggest difference. And I say this with a massive caveat, because external agency and client relationships, they don't preclude having a shared agenda at all. And I've got some brilliant examples I can draw on of partnerships I've built with external clients that have been really joined at the hip, you know, where we've had a North Star. But I think at some point there is always a divergence in that agenda. The massive game changer for me is this lack of P&L. It really does mean the ultimate partnership. We're all breathing the same air. We talk at Specsavers about green blood, and God, does that beat around our agency. It's not unusual to have tenure of 20 years upwards in our team. So these guys are so invested in the business and its performance. So we start off every agency meeting, not with where we are in a campaign new business league or how we're doing in terms of PR headlines. We talk about the trading results of our partners. And the whole team lead forward to listen into this. So that feels to me a massive shift. And not disconnected to this is the definition of success. That's another shift. I've had to really get under the bonnet of what drives our teams, and it's without a doubt a different dynamic. Of course, we care about awards. We've got shelves of them. But we're just as likely to get excited about our partners' trading results, or the launch of a new range of frames, or the impact we've made on a customer's life. The brand purpose of Specsavers, we talk about we want to exist to make a positive difference to the lives of all. And that jumps right off the PowerPoint slide in Specs and is evident across the whole business. But we've made an interpretation of that as an agency as well. You know, we want to make a positive difference to the lives of our colleagues. We want people to love Specsavers, not just as a brand, but as a place to work. And I think that starts to seep into our behaviours. The big thing, and I suppose a major driver for me taking this role, was the ability to break down all barriers with our clients. We do talk about clients, and again, we've had debate around this because they're colleagues, and I know, having spoken already to some peers across in-house agencies, there's different takes on this, and I'm sure you've all got your own interpretation of it. We've got as much skin in the game as they have. And there's a much greater ability to influence because we're properly at the top table. But I still think it's important, certainly for us, and as I say, the size and scale we are, to have an ethic of client delivery, because I think that's really important for the work. But we don't handle our clients. We don't talk about it that way. We talk about partnership. So about 9 months ago, we set up an account handling team. That's definitely not referred to as an account handling team. We have a client partnership team. The change for me as well is these sticky conversations that, of course, we always need to have with clients are done without risk. And Nil spoke this morning about taking the fear away out of things being a great way to build creativity. And I think there's a psychological safety that we feel within our agency that allows us to do that. And also an acknowledgement, again, it's already been talked about today, you know, we don't work if we don't all work. So there's mutual investment in marketing and agency, and critically the people that make up those teams. So the next shift for me, and the bit I'm really enjoying experiencing, is the people agenda. And I suppose as I've grown up in this industry and I look back on what I've achieved, the most motivating and compelling aspect of my role has always been around people. I think as leaders, we're bestowed this gift, aren't we, of being able to make a massive difference to people's lives, either positively or negatively. And I think that's a responsibility we should take really seriously. And as I say, I look back and I get as much joy about thinking about the people stories, the positive people stories that I've supported, than some of the great work that we've all got out of the door. So for me, this is a shift. Because at Specsavers, most certainly development is a bigger part of the conversation. I suppose it's natural due to the size of the organisation. You know, there's an opportunity there for lateral moves and the ability by doing that to influence a greater breadth of the organisation. So they're the bits that feel culturally really different to me, and I'm really leaning into to kind of explore the potential of all of those things. But it's not all rosy, because it never is it? No environment is ever perfect. And I think there's some elements we just have to lean into harder to crack in the in-house model that we've got. And the first one is, and I'm sure all of you who are in in-house roles will really get this, it's having to work much harder to get a nose over the fence. And that's, you know, keep an eye on our broader industry. That's why events like today are so beneficial. It's about over-indexing on bringing the outside in, because unlike all of the agency environments I've ever worked in, you know, the next desk doesn't have 3 different brands on it that you can have a nose about what they're doing and potentially get some inspiration from. And you know, I feel like to be part of the wider industry, which we very much are, we need to be curious about what that industry are doing. And that is harder to do when you're just one brand, thinking about one brand day in, day out, albeit at depth and at breadth and really with skin in the game. We have to force ourselves and provoke moments of curiosity and provoke conversations around what's happening on the outside, and an understanding about where we sit as part of this bigger industry, which is really exciting and progressive, and we're seen as an exciting and progressive part of it. But I feel like we need to be intentional at all times about dialing up that conversation. I think this is a really tough one, emotional boundaries. I think if there's such a thing as suffering from over empathizing, I might suffer from it. So it's difficult, isn't it? Because with intimacy comes empathy, and with empathy comes potentially a change of behavior and a dropping of some of the rules and a softening of some of the systems. You know, we're being asked to marry agility with quality, and of course that's a really important part of what we do. But when do you rein back on the agility to just prioritize the quality? And when do you balance that empathy with an objectivity that just makes you rise above this and say, actually, no, our reason for being as an agency is around delivering great work for this brand. So actually, some of the behaviors that maybe we're softening because we empathize aren't going to get us to that. So it's this skin in the game being a double-edged sword. And again, these things aren't insurmountable, but it's just about having a different awareness, because it is a very different dynamic. And finally, Jim kicked off today talking about how we articulate the value of creative services. And I think that applies to the wider agency when you're talking about in-house. You know, how do we, when we're not being, we don't have fees being debated around us, there's no explicit rate card, we don't have a P&L, how do we prove our value? And we need to do that in different ways. It's a bit like there's never been a pitch for you scenario. You know, it's about putting junctures in our ways of working where we can reflect on the value that we're bringing. It's about really building back to these partnerships, really close partnerships, so that we can build this mutual respect of our expertise and what we do. So that's my brain dump, my thoughts of the last 12 months. In part, you know, so many similarities, so much to still enjoy, so much of the things that I've always loved about our industry exist in our in-house agency on this island at Specsavers. And in part, a shift, but a shift I'm delighted to have made, not least because of the brilliant creative ops team that we've got supporting us all. So really, really chuffed to be able to partake in today. I hope that was useful to give you some insights into what life has been like making this shift. And I think we will have some time for questions.
Yes, we do. Nicola, thank you so much for that. That's
my pleasure.
An amazing insight into the beacon of in-house agencies, and fascinating, I'm sure, for everybody. Plenty of questions, unsurprisingly. So I'd like to start off with is one that is a common challenge, and you may have had some personal experience of this by now, or perhaps you haven't. But how would you advise a creative operations team trying to run their operations in the most smooth, efficient way possible by having some processes, having some ways of working, and perhaps some SLAs, but actually being overruled by stakeholders? So, you know, typically the scenario is, yes, I know, but just do it. A kind of JFDI, you know, I know, but you just got to do it because I'm big and important. what would your advice be for the
I mean,
audience on that?
look, it all comes back, doesn't it, to this partnership piece and the building of relationships, because that is far less likely to happen if you're building relationships with people. And if it does happen, you can have an open communication about it. I think there's the art of persuasion has got a lot to play here. And the art of selling why you want to do something. We're in the business of telling stories, aren't we? So tell a story about why this is a good thing to do. All of those arts of persuasion I would bring to the table if you've got those problems.
Yeah. Perhaps thinking about it from the other side of the tennis court, if you like, and just thinking about what advantage can I explain that they will get by sticking to the SLAs a little bit more often, and so on.
It's the benefit, isn't it? It's back to the benefit. What will their ultimate benefit be? But it's not easy. And as I say, that's why sometimes it's more than one conversation. It's a persuasion campaign.
Yes, it's a campaign. Yeah, very good, very good. A linked question really to that, building on that, again, from the audience, how would you encourage creative operations professionals to help raise their profile and showcase their benefit to a business or agency so that they're seen as more than traffic management?
Do you know, it's a bit, I'll steal a phrase from what I've talked about today. It's allowing people to get under the bonnet of what you do, rather than being, I think Nils talked about it this morning, didn't he? When it all goes well, no one knows you exist. But there is you can be the forgotten department, and I wouldn't allow that to happen, because actually people are really interested in what happens under that bonnet. So some of that comes out of a confidence that the role that you play is really blooming important. So be proud of it, share it, explain it, because people will generally be interested in it. But be also prepared to expose it, nuts and all.
Yes. And just as an aside, just to mention, the pre-conference seminar yesterday was on exactly that theme. As I mentioned this morning, I believe it's going to be run again at the Festival of Creative Ops. So that's a good thing to come to if this is of specific interest. So moving on. You talked so much about how you need to stay in touch with what's going on outside of the business. And Sarah Megali asked if you have any specific tips on how to do that.
So, I mean, look, we've all got networks, haven't we? And it's really about, firstly, sweat that network, because we all know people who can bring inspiration in from the outside into our organizations, but also then make it an event. So we're doing a monthly lunch and learn where we will always have an external speaker come in, and we'll design that by department, because what might inspire our concept team might be something different to what inspires our creative production. But just making sure that it's something you prioritize and you almost institute as a thing that actually happens will force you to then fuel that calendar of inspiration coming into you.
Yeah, great, thank you. And then from an outside perspective to an inside perspective, this is from John Owen. He loved the primary focus on trading performance, and rather than creative awards at your team meetings, and that in no way implies a lack of creativity.
No, not at all.
But do you have any tips for in-house agencies trying to foster a thirst for creativity in the wider organization, especially if your wider organization is not necessarily a creative one? So quite different cultures, perhaps.
Really different cultures. So one thing we've started to do at Specsavers, we have every 6 weeks we have a meeting that we call the Loop, and it's not just agency, it's all of our marketing and other product colleagues that join that. But in that Loop meeting, we always have a creative presence. We always have a creative story to tell. And we're quite considered about what that story is, depending on what message we need to land that month about creativity. But we always make sure that our creatives have a good slot on that, and they're telling a story about something that's completely unrelated to Specsavers, but just raises the awareness of how exciting creativity can be. And never has anyone walked away from one of those going, that creative presentation was boring. They're always really excited to be part of that conversation, because it's not part of their day-to-day, to your point.
Yeah, great, thank you. And again, nice segue to the next question, which is about collaboration internally, I guess. This is from Ellie Hazel, and she asks, what's the balance between your in-house agency directing or suggesting creative work and projects versus the wider company making requests? So who drives the process of deciding what you're going to do? Is that kind of top down from marketing? Do you drive it from creative, or do you work together?
I think it's really collaborative. It really is, in the way that it always should be, regardless of what the agency construct is. And as I mentioned in my presentation, it's not just collaborative between marketing and us. We involve other agencies in that as well, because I think you have to have everyone's perspective to land on the right level of rigor for planning.
Yeah. Okay. And I think I've just got time for one more question, which is from Lindy Hatton. Apologies if I've mispronounced that, Lindy. At the organisations I've worked, analytics and implementation have been part of the marketing team, not the creative department. What's your perspective on this?
So this is a relatively new shift for us. We only brought analytics and implementation into our team back in August. And the reason we did it was because we want to be able to influence how the brand shows up right the way through the customer journey. And I think that's how brands are thinking more and more now, aren't they, about their full customer journey and how customers are experiencing them. So to be an agency that can deliver end to end, we needed both of those functions to sit within us. And the broader business were aligned with that. So they found themselves a new home. And it's surprisingly natural. Their fit is surprisingly natural within everything we're doing, because we know where they sit in the whole holistic infrastructure of the agency.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nicola. That was fascinating. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, guys. Take care.